Stoicism, as defined by Oxford, is the endurance of pain or hardship without the display of feelings and without complaint. Today, we'll talk about how that's accurate and how that's inaccurate. Hello, and welcome back to Season Discourse. This is Sajjad, and I have Nate with me as always. And today, we're here with a very special guest, Dr. Boucher. She is an English, French, and Spanish-speaking board-certified anesthesiologist with a subspecialty in pain medicine. She graduated from the University of Utah School of Medicine in 2014 and was also a mentor for the Latin Medical Student Association. She completed her residency at the Morehouse School of Medicine in Atlanta, Georgia. Now she's back here in Salt Lake City working at the University of Utah, not only as an anesthesiologist, but also as a core faculty educator for the Clinical Methods and Medical Decision-Making course. Thank you for joining us today.
Wow, thanks for having me.
Dr.
I didn't realize
Boucher.
you were going to have so much info on me.
We do our research.
Have to. Dr. Boucher, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good this
Yeah.
morning.
Good.
Yeah,
Good. We are as well.
excited to talk to you guys about this stuff.
I'm excited as well. For those of you that don't know, CMC is a course that we take within our medical school curriculum. And she is actually my facilitator for that. And, she has actually helped me to bridge my passion for medicine with also helping people out like within the clinic, I think she's done a really good job as a facilitator. So I just want to thank you for being here and thank you for being, who you are. You know what I mean? Absolutely. Dr. Boucher, first things first, I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
Yeah. How did you get to where and who you are today? And by that, I mean, what paths were taken, the schools, the work that you've done, hobbies, maybe the ideologies that you've adopted or you've always had. Like, how did you get to who you are, your persona, your characteristics? What makes you you? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think pretty early on, I figured out that I kind of developed a philosophy of life for myself that there were certain things that mattered and that were important in life. And usually those are not the things that other people care about. And so it's kind of important to think about and find what it is that drives you. And I don't know how I figured that out, but I feel like it was pretty early on. I realized, I don't want to be on the train that everyone else thinks I should be on. I want to do the things that I think are important to me and that matter in this life. And so because of that, I pursued the things that I found interesting. So you read this long resume about me, all these kind of varied things that I've done. I loved dancing. And so I did a dance major in college. And I always thought I'd go into medicine. So I did a biochemistry major as well. I loved languages. So I did a French major too, and so I didn't let that hold me back. People thought, you're crazy. Why are you taking 20 credits every semester? But when you find things that you love doing, it's not hard to do it. So I just try to find the things that drive me and go for that, kind of regardless of what other people might think.
I think that I don't know, it warmed my heart what you just said. And I mean that because the last thing you said about when you love what you're doing, it's the work that may seem so hard is actually effortless, to yourself. And I think that's very beautiful. You actually kind of beat me to my next question and you actually answered it. I was going to ask you, why did you take those particular routes? And you kind of just answered that. It's really important to find what you love and pursue that. Because when you go against that grain, your brain, not to be a rapper or anything like that, but your brain really goes through a lot of cognitive dissonance, a lot of friction, and that's stressful. So I just completely concur with what you just said. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think that's a hard thing to figure out is what drives you. And I think a lot of people go through just whatever it is in life, whether it's school, whether it's going into a job, whatever it is, they struggle trying to find what drives them. And I say this because, I have a little sister who's in college right now, and she calls me every now and then, and she's like, hey, like, how did you figure out that you wanted to go into medicine? How did you figure out you wanted to do this, do that? And I always tell her, I'm like, you know what? I found something in college that made me want to learn more. And I took it and I ran with it. And I just was going to see where it's going to take me. I just waited until there was a roadblock big enough that it would push me away. But I found that in that journey, whatever roadblock that did come up, I was like, I am willing to fight to overcome this. And I think that helped her figure out that it's not really something that you ever really figure out completely. It's more of like something that you kind of get your toes like wet in, right? And it's like, okay, can I see myself pushing through the difficult days in this like field or whatever this is that I'm doing? With all that being said, she still doesn't know what she wants to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really tough question to
yeah.
answer sometimes. I think it helps to have an idea of what motivates you and kind of what goal you might be heading towards. Because otherwise, it's really easy to get stuck on this idea that you are supposed to be really impressive or that you're supposed to be impressing people. And there are certain things you're supposed to be doing. And that can completely cloud the things that end up being your passion. And so I heard this quote once about if you just do your best with what you have and, you're not trying to impress people, but you're an impressive person because you work really hard at the things that you do, then you're going to get somewhere, wherever that is, and it's going to be a good place.
We're just both writing notes about how lovely what you're saying is. What you just spoke of actually reminded me of our recent episode, which will be coming out very soon, with the MS1s. Haley, she spoke about a nice little phrase called that went by expression over impression. I don't know if you remember that, but that completely correlates with what you're saying. When you accept who you are, which is a long process, I'm still in the middle of that, right? Because there's a lot of facets to it. You don't lean on or you're not always trying to impress others with what you do. And I think that's very important for your well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So expression over impression. Don't try to impress. Express yourself and let that go. And another thing you spoke about is when you are good at what you do. So you put that work in, you practice, you study it to become better at your own expression, your unique niche. Lovely.
Yeah.
So that kind of takes us into the initial quote not the quote, but the definition that I described at the beginning about Stoicism and how I think it has, digressed in terms of how the modern day description of it is. Because when someone goes in on Google, like that's exactly what I did to see what the vast majority of people would define it as. And the thing that I saw most was they would describe it as people who look at life without a lens of emotion with it. And I think that is it's somewhat accurate, but also I think it paints a picture that's not necessarily what Stoicism is. So I kind of want to talk about that a little bit to see what you guys think in terms of, I guess, how you feel like some of the tenets of Stoicism resonate with you. Right. And I guess I can go first and kind of talk about one of the biggest things that resonates with me. And I think it all goes back to perception. And it's something that we just touched on a little bit as well. How you perceive the things that affect you really impacts your emotions behind them. So obviously there are certain things that can happen to you that no matter how well you prepare yourself, it's going to impact you negatively. Like the loss of a loved one, it's a big one, right? It's unless you're some sort of robot, it's going to affect you. But I think one of the most beautiful things that I think goes back even to ancient Stoicism is knowing that no matter what happens to you, you have the strength to overcome whatever obstacle comes into your path. And that kind of touches onto like multiple tenets of Stoicism, but I think that that's beautiful.
Mhm.
What do you guys think?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I was going to say that's, I think, the most challenging example that the Stoics use. And they sort of advocate for, well, if somebody dies, you shouldn't be affected by it. And I don't think that that's so much what they meant, that you shouldn't have emotions about it. I think more so they advocated for preparing yourself for those difficult things. And losing a loved one is one of the most difficult things that you're going to face in your life, right? And so it's more about managing expectations of how you'll handle something like that. And so if you practice Stoicism throughout your life, you're going to get a lot of time thinking about how you will deal with negative emotions and how you'll deal with these negative situations in a way that you'll still be able to keep moving forward with your life, kind of despite those bad things that will inevitably happen to you.
I love that. Preparing yourself versus hoping that things don't happen to you.
Well, and kind of coming back to what you said at the beginning about how people define Stoicism now, I think when you, especially taking that kind of example, you can see why people think of it as like, well, being Stoic means you just don't portray any emotion and you don't have emotion. But that's a little bit not quite what they were going for. So in the modern day, being Stoic means not portraying any emotion, but being a Stoic person or living by a Stoic philosophy is more about how do you handle negative emotions. And on the flip side, they were all about joy and positive emotions. And so it's more about how can you have some control over those negative things and how they affect you so that you can kind of live your best life.
Absolutely. I also want to add to that. Yeah, I agree. And I love that, Sajah, I love that you brought, you used a definition that was probably founded or like created not today, in our present time, but in between now and when Stoicism was initially brought upon us. You know what I mean? So it's like in between that time. And I think that's really important to kind of show how things, no matter where you are in the world, all the cracks and crevices of the world, any type of communication will be interpreted a different way by different people, right? The world revolves around the game of telephone. You know what I mean? Like the thing that we learned at a young age. So I think it's really important to see that even though that definition, the Oxford definition was talking about how they denounce emotion. I agree with you, Dr. Boucher, that they utilize their emotion, but their response to the emotion is what is key.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very important. I'm forgetting what I was going to say just now, but yes, when we as individuals, we as human beings who are emotional creatures, we don't react negatively to our emotions. It will bring a positive outcome. But what we typically do is react negatively to our emotions or use our emotions to react. And it usually conceives a negative outcome. And I think one important saying is this: we as human beings, we have an environment that throws at us external disturbances. We as human beings have an internal environment that also throws internal disturbances. We can't necessarily control those what's thrown at us, right? Not even on the inside. We can make certain inputs like our nutrition, our diet, exercise, and whatnot. Being mindful what we consume in terms of information, depending on your access. That's a different story, but we can't control those disturbances, those things that are thrown at us on the inside and the outside. But we can control our reactions to it, right? We get emotional from what's thrown at us, whether it's from the outside or the inside. We get emotional, but your response to it, your choice from those emotions, I think is what Stoicism is grounded upon.
Yeah. And they would even say that you can practice not having negative emotions at all to certain things that come up.
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of a lifelong struggle and journey for most humans. Just like you said, we're emotional beings. And so it's hard to do that. But the more you think about it and practice it, I think the easier it actually does become, so that you're not only having your negative emotions and then reacting positively, where you're actually having fewer negative emotions because you're recognizing that they're not serving you.
100%. And, when I first brought this, or I guess when I first looked up the definition of Stoicism on Google, just to see what the widely accepted definition is, and I saw that, it actually made me think about this time back when a good friend of mine actually brought up Stoicism, even before I even actually understood what it was. And this is before, I think this is even before medical school. And she brought it up. She said that, have you ever looked into Stoicism? She's like, you kind of express a lot of the teachings behind the philosophy of Stoicism. And I was like, I doubt it, whatever. I just heard Stoicism. I was like, in my head, what I thought was, I have emotion. What are you talking about? Like, I'm not an emotionless being. Because that's what I thought Stoicism was. And I had like this negative, almost negative, I guess, connotation towards it. And, just understanding that there's a purpose behind why that emotion aspect plays into this is actually amazing, because like you said, the more you practice it, the better you get. I mean, it's like anything that you do. It's like riding a bike. The more you do it, the better you get. So that's amazing. And I think we touched on one of these ancient tenets, which is defined as premeditatio malorum, which basically is like the premeditation to like expect bad outcomes.
Right. Yes. And there's a whole practice surrounding that actually some modern day philosophers, there's one I really like called William B. Irvine, who actually teaches at a university, the Stoic philosophies. And he kind of proposes there's this practice you can do called negative visualization, which is, I think, where you're going with that more ancient term. I don't remember what it was, but and so negative visualization is something where you actually practice thinking about kind of the worst outcome that can happen and using that to foster appreciation for what you have. And so if you think about, wow, this building that we're in right now could crumble and fall apart and you could be homeless. And if you spend some time imagining yourself in that situation, it can make you realize how grateful you are to have this house that you're currently in. And so you can use that practice for lots of different situations in life.
That's amazing that you bring that up, because that goes into why I think in the modern day, why a lot of people have like crushing anxiety or crushing feelings of discomfort in situations. Like I always hear about people having like intrusive thoughts about things. And that's like what you brought up about the building crumbling. For some people, that would be a very intrusive thought. But this tenet of like focusing on the fact that, that could happen, but doesn't that allow you to really appreciate that you have it currently? And that's actually one of the biggest things about Stoicism, is living in the present and staying present at all times, because what isn't happening isn't happening.
Right. Right. And the goal isn't to be stuck on thinking about all the bad things that could happen to you right now. It's just to use that as a way to remind yourself of all the good things that you do have.
What's interesting is I'm smiling because this is a wonderful topic. Anyways, can't control it. What's interesting is I feel like to the untrained person, like myself, for example, and it's a relative spectrum, untrained as in regards to how much training you've done within Stoicism or the likes of it. That can be a slippery slope. Negative visualization. It's very important. The outcomes are very fruitful, but that can be a slippery slope. And I say that because, like SJ, what you brought up was the anxiety and whatnot. The byproduct of negative visualization, and there's many, but I'll focus on two. It could be, you being grateful and appreciative It will be, right? But it can also bring that anxiety, maybe even panic attacks and whatnot, right? Especially if something like that actually comes about. Now, you would think that that preparation, that negative visualization, that practice will help you prepare when that time comes, right? But what sucks is sometimes our brains just are just limited, right? So we can't actually fully prepare for when that time comes. There are certain things that we can, but there's certain things that we can't. The emotion just overwhelms us. But that is a important practice. It's actually something I've been doing for a long time, but I didn't know the term behind it. So it made me smile before I started talking, because you terming it made me just it just made me, like, I guess, accept, like, I was proud of myself. Like, oh, I've been doing this for some time. And I was like, I think I was putting myself kind of down. Like, why do I keep having these intrusive thoughts? Why do I keep thinking or over preparing myself for, oh, what if I get in this car accident right now? This car, turns in this lane. Why do I keep doing that instead of just going about my day? No more stress. Like, I'm done with the day. You know what I mean? But it's an important practice, I think. Because if you don't think about that and that time comes, it's like it's your first time thinking, that can get kind of ugly,
and you won't be prepared.
Kind of like your immune system when it has
immunoglobulins. Man, that brings back some very intrusive thoughts for me. So let's stay away from
it. Yeah. Well, it sounds like it can also be a way to use those intrusive thoughts in a more positive way. Mm-hmm. Especially if it's something you kind of naturally do, then if you're aware that it's happening, mm-hmm. you can use that to think about, hey, I'm kind of worrying about this car hitting me, but maybe I can use that to my advantage to think about how, isn't it amazing that we're like driving into cars right now and that I don't have to walk somewhere. And so obviously life is a risk-benefit scenario all the time. And so if you worry about all the bad things that are going to happen to you all the time, you're going to have a hard time living a peaceful life. and that's actually what the goal and like foundation of Stoicism is working towards kind of gaining tranquility and ease in your life.
Very well said. And honestly, this topic, just the whole like this car topic, is making me think about this scenario that actually ties very well into what we're talking about. I was sitting at a red light, and I wasn't the one driving. My good friend was. And, so the light turn is a left turn lane. So the light just turned green. And the car to the right of us, there's only one left turn lane, to give it some context. And we're turning left. The car to the right of us also decided to turn left, when actually that car should have been going straight. And I don't think they were paying attention to see like where we were at. So my friend just continues to drive, notices that car is about to turn possibly into his car. And what I saw him do in that moment made me think about this, because he just kept driving as if it wasn't even going to happen. So there's like this calm sense to him. He turned, kept going. And I looked at him, I was like, did that not freak you out just now? Because I was sitting there, I looked over at the car and I was like, that car is about to hit us. It actually didn't hit us, but it realized that we were there. And the answer that he gave me made me realize that he was on a whole different level of tranquility that I wasn't even on, because he said, well, if he hit me, what can I do at that point? He hit me, right? And I can't control whether he hits me or not. I can control my reaction to what is about to happen, and that's staying calm. And I was like, wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, and what a much better way to handle that situation, right? You can imagine the flip side of how he could have handled it, how you might imagine you might have handled it, right?
Yeah.
And then when you compare the two, it's pretty easy to see which version you might like to be more. And so it's kind of a nice way to.
And reacting like that could actually have negative outcomes. If you immediately think that car is going to hit you, you might even jerk your steering wheel, right?
Right.
And that could cause its own problems. So yeah, that just made me think of that.
Well, it's a wonderful example, for people to relate to, right? Dr. Boucher, how did you find Stoicism? Like, where along your path of life did you did you not? Because okay, let me retract that. Within my life, I've heard about it. I was like, all right, yeah, cool. I've done it without really acknowledging that, oh, this is what it is termed as. And then here I am now, kind of more so realizing that this is something of everyday life. People back then, years ago, were doing it. And it's just history repeats itself. Like, it's useful for our life as a human being. So I'm curious, how did you find Stoicism? Like, what led you to it? And what consolidated your connection to its school of thought?
Yeah. So we were talking earlier before we were recording about how I've been studying wellness for a long time. And so Stoicism is more of a recent find for me. But the way it all began was I read this book that suggested that you should spend at least an hour every day working on your personal development and kind of multiple facets of that. So it included writing, meditating, exercising, and reading as part of the things that you should do to improve yourself as a person. And so I started doing that. I got up at 5 a.m. every day. I started spending an hour doing a little bit of each of those things. And so in that process, I started reading a lot. Every day, I read at least 10 minutes of a book on personal development, personal wellness, philosophy, all kinds of things. And so I got through a lot of different books and ideas. And so in that journey is where Stoicism came up. I was looking for my next guidance to learn from. And it was actually the author that I've mentioned earlier, William B. Irvine. And so the first book I read was called The Stoic Challenge. And it was all about how to use Stoicism in the modern day to be a more resilient person.
Wow. You know, it makes me think about resiliency. Before medical school, I was in the mental health field, and the patient population that I was working with, I just remember within my notes for the patients, I would always include resiliency, because this was a part, my patient population was the underserved population. So veterans and like refugees and whatnot. It was more so from the refugees, but that was made such a huge impact on my life. Like, it was so rewarding and it also helped me see just, how grateful I can be for my life, with what I have, via negative visualization and seeing, you know what I mean? The realities of a lot of people's lives. So, but resiliency is, a really interesting concept because, it's, sometimes when you're being resilient, it doesn't feel like you're striving, right? I think we as humans love to feel like we're striving, like we're doing well, we're achieving this, achieving that, like we're, but when we're struggling, that process of struggling it could be the same thing or under the umbrella of resiliency. And I think it's important for us to enjoy it. And if not enjoy it, just really acknowledge that this is a part of what is supposed to be. So I just think resiliency is something that, a lot of people shy away from, scared of being uncomfortable, scared of this, scared of that. But I think resiliency is an important thing to hone in on, so I love that you brought that up.
Yeah. So what you said about how you found Stoicism and like kind of like that process, it just makes me think about my life before medical school versus now my life while in medical school. And I think I talked to you about this just a little bit briefly before we started recording, was that I had so much time before coming to medical school, and I took that for granted a lot. Like, I lived as if time was infinite. And I guess in some ideologies it can be infinite, but the way that I live my life, I didn't care if I spent 3 hours just sitting around playing video games. And nowadays, if I sat around for 3 hours playing video games, I would be like, wow, I just wasted so much time. So it just completely changes your perspective whenever you are realizing that you have less and less time. And this is something we've talked about in previous podcasts. But basically, to tie it all together, what you said, you spent like an hour, or is that what you said, an hour, working on things that would improve you. And this just makes me think about this because this changed my life completely. When I came to med school, and I've talked about this before, is I was so used to having like my family around, my mom around, things like that. And my mom is a wonderful mom. She would always like bring me food and make sure that I was fed, and like I didn't have to worry about my meals.
Yeah.
So like, she would always take care of me in that aspect. But moving here, I knew that I wasn't gonna have my mom around. So I had to make my own food. I made this decision coming to med school. I was like, the first day when I move here, immediately what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna meal prep, right? I'm gonna make my meals for the week, and I'm gonna do that consistently. And me doing that, and I did that I started that 3 years ago, first year of med school, I guess 2.5 now. But first day of med school, I started doing that. Obviously, there were times when like I was more busy, I didn't get to it, but I have consistently remained doing that. And that has changed my life completely because it made me realize that I'm not this helpless little boy who doesn't know how to make food, for one. And for two, I had control over what I was eating. And that, on top of working out and like going to the gym, changed my whole like well-being, because I went throughout my days with more purpose, with more confidence, and just overall felt better about myself. And I found that like when I didn't do those things, it impacted me negatively. I mean, this kind of goes back to the whole perception thing, but yeah, I just wanted to touch on that because I thought that was amazing. And also you brought up about, resiliency. And I think it's a very, very beautiful thing that goes into Stoicism is the ability to bounce back, right? And I mean, that's essentially what resiliency is. And that's like one of the tenets is no matter what you are faced with, you should have trust in yourself to know that you can get back up and you should get back up, right? No matter how many times you get knocked down, no matter what you're doing, get back up. And through adversity, we find our path.
Well, and everything you just said reminded me of this very brief quote that kind of sums it up very nicely. 3 words: identity, action, feelings, in that order. And the reason that matters is because if you focus on your identity, so who are you? Who do you want to be? You want to be that guy who makes meals every time and exercises, and those things are good for you. And so that's the kind of person you are. That informs the actions that you do. So you're the guy who meal preps every Sunday and goes to the gym and does that thing, right? And then what does that result in? These feelings of positivity that this is the kind of person you are. And if you do it in the opposite order, which is what a lot of people get easily sucked into, maybe you feel bad, you're not feeling good, and you allow that to inform the actions that you do, then that's going to lead to a certain identity that you may not want. And so if you can turn things around and focus on your identity, who are you and what are the things that you do that make you you, then that is going to lead to living your best life. And
I am going to come back with a different quote because what you did there was amazing. And it made me think of this. Allow your body to be the slave of your mind rather than allowing your mind to be the slave of your body. And to explain that is, if your body tells you that you're tired, but your mind tells you that you have to get some stuff done, are you going to listen to your body or are you going to listen to your mind?
Don't ask me, man. Don't ask me.
Well, and that reminds me too of something you said a little bit earlier, along with what you just said. So I read another nice book that talked about the difference between things that you do that are restorative for you, for your body and your mind, and things that you do that are a relief for your body and your mind. And the difference being that if you are doing something that's just a relief, that's usually temporary. It may not benefit you that much for a long term, but maybe in that moment you just need to check out, right? Or play video games for 3 hours. And that may be something your body needs at that time. And that's okay. It's as long as you're paying attention to if you need that right now. But sometimes your body might be telling you that what you really need is restoration. And so maybe you need to go to the gym, or you need to make a healthy meal, or you need to get that work done. And that's what's going to benefit you the most. And so it's mostly about being aware of where you're at and using that as a guide and trusting yourself.
That's such a difficult thing to differentiate relief versus restoration. And the reason why when you said that I had like this epiphany moment is because just recently, actually just yesterday, so I've been working on editing our last podcast, and it's a lot of work just to edit it. So it takes a lot of time. And, there are days when I'm had a really busy day, come home and I'm like, oh, I got to work on this, get this done. And I will do it. Yesterday, I finally completed all the like editing, and the feeling that I had afterwards was like this sense of like satisfaction, right? But I think the best way to put it was it was a restorative feeling, because I just did something for myself that I think was more concrete, because I still feel the effects of that today. And it wasn't this temporary relief that I would have gained from like video games or something like that.
Yeah.
Amazing.
You guys just spit a lot of knowledge. And I don't know what to say. No, this is beautiful. This is a beautiful thing going on. The identity, actions, feelings, phrase, or quote, so clear and concise, so succinct, and people love it. We love short, but we love powerful. It's short, but it's potent. And it made me start to think about positive and negative perpetuation. When you do it in order that it was intended, so identity, like she pointed out, and like you talked about, someone who meal preps and whatnot. Fast forward to your actions. Okay, your actions are to go to the gym and continue the meal prep. You see progress. You see gains and whatnot, and it gives you a feel. So positive reinforcement. That's how it should be, right? So it's a positive cycle of something you create, and then you're thinking, wow. So this idea that I had in my head, meal prep, just because I want to work out, I want to gain some weight, get more fit. It made me feel satisfied with this journey. Like, here I am now, and I'm going to continue it. What else can I do? And then you come up with something else that you want to do to get better at. And at the end of it all, it's going to make you feel good that you achieved it. And hopefully it makes you feel even better that it's rewarding. Versus the inverse of that, doing it the opposite way, where you feel some type of way about something. Maybe it's reactive, maybe it's proactive, but typically it's reactive. You feel some type of way. And then with that feeling, you react to it, producing an action. And then from there forth, it creates an identity. And that cycle can become negatively perpetuated, and it is a negative perpetuation. And then you have these identities about yourself that really, I think, innately shouldn't be who you are. You know what I mean? And it's hard to get out of that. It's easier to create these negative identities than it is for these positive ones. And I think it's important to start, with motivation, drive, and a good social support group. Another thing anybody want to say anything about that?
No, you're going off.
No. I mean, that was a powerful quote. You remember who?
I know. I wish I could remember who the author was, but it was a book called Resilience,
Wow.
I think, or Resilient.
This is making me realize I really should read more.
A lot of people, I usually call it personal development, because people get freaked out by the term self-help, and but it's really the same. Self-help book, personal development, philosophy, guides, but why would you shy away from the lessons other people have learned? They may not, everything other people have to say may not benefit you or may not resonate with you, but there can be a lot that someone else already figured out that you can learn from. So
there's this beautiful thing that I came across. So, I mean, this goes back to ancient Stoicism, back like Marcus Aurelius, who like wrote this. It wasn't really a book. It's called Meditations. I'm sure you know
it was
of
like
it.
His journal, basically.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He like just noted down, like, I don't know, each day some of the lessons that he learned or whatever. But there's this thing that he talks about is that history repeats itself, right? And that the things that you're going through, someone else has already gone through. So why not take the lessons that other people have learned and enact them onto your own? And that makes just me saying that makes me think of this, just Stoicism in general, because it's such an ancient philosophy that has been around for so long, but the tenets behind it are still applicable to this day. Like,
yes,
that's just the most beautiful thing that I have noticed with it.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing, actually, how much overlap there is.
Spectacular.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. I don't have that big of a vocab, so I was thinking of words. I was like, what word can I use that's going to be like, wow.
We got to start reading more.
No, we got to read more. No cap. Listen, man, what you just said was powerful for me. It reminded me of experiential learning.
Oh, yes.
Right. So this is something I think that was brought up in one of our previous episodes, but experiential learning, I said, is the greatest teacher. Right. And I say that because of what you kind of just talked about. Why is it that we as a species cannot take what others before us have went through or experienced and learn from, and take those lessons, right? Internalize them and go forth? Well, I think it's because experiential learning is the greatest teacher, but there's a disconnect there. So wisdom comes from experience. That's why we typically associate wisdom with, older people. Respect your elders and whatnot. It all ties together. And a wise person, in my opinion, would be one that takes those lessons from the older person or more experienced person and applies them to their life. All right. However, that's not what we always do. We usually have to experience whatever it is that we've been taught not to do or to do. And then we go through it, maybe doing the opposite of that, or AKA experiencing it. And then we learn, oh, so this is how it is. Oh, so they were right. And that's where the disconnect is. Why is it that we have to experience it? I don't have an answer to this. I don't think there really is. But why is it that we have to experience it before we learn versus being told the lessons of those who experienced it? They're humans too. We're all humans. Same, circuits, processes, and whatnot on our inside. They experienced it. But yet when they tell us those lessons that they learned through experience, man, we have to experience it too. Yeah, history repeats itself, man.
Yeah. When you said all that, it made me think about an experience in my life. And this goes back to, being raised and like childhood and like my parents and like how like their philosophy in raising me. And their philosophy was to teach me. I mean, I'm assuming this is every parent's philosophy is to teach you what they have learned in hopes that you will take what they've taught you and enact them in your life, right? And there's a lot of things that they did that I did do that with. But there's a lot of stuff that they tried to teach me that I was like, it's fine. Like, I'll figure it out. And it's funny because in hindsight, if I had taken that knowledge or those lessons that they wanted me to learn, I would have probably been better off. But I don't think I would have experienced the stuff that I would have experienced and learned it in the way that I did if I hadn't done it, right? Although it did get me into trouble at times, and I went through some things that I'm not proud of, but at the same time, it worked to define me to who I am today, and I'm not mad about it. But I think what I really want to highlight there is the fact that I think people like there's this like notion that your parents should show you or teach you the things that you should know and that you should take it in and just let that guide you. But in reality, like what you're saying, we don't really do it until we experience it. So I just wanted to relate that to personal experiences because I think it's very applicable.
Well, and I mean, there are so many things that go into your development as a person. And unfortunately, we're not born with the wisdom of all the ages and all the people who came before us, right? And even though you're raised by parents who've had the experiences that you could potentially learn from, there are so many values that you can have in this world. And so you can only focus on so many of them too, right? So you kind of have to find the values that are the most important to you and that matter to you. And sometimes your parents didn't go through an experience that matters and changes who you are. And so there's room for both, right? You are going to have to experience things to become who you are. But if you're willing and want to find lessons from those who came before you, then you can definitely learn. But you have to be open to it and you have to be looking for it too.
Seek, and you will find.
With brevity comes depth.
Are we just quoting things now? What's going on?
I
love it. I love it.
I made that one up. You like that one?
No, I mean, it was like right after I said something, then you hit a quote, like a quote.
I wasn't prepared. I didn't have a third quote.
Yeah,
Sorry.
But it's
No,
okay.
you have come very much prepared.
No, you're making this. Listen, I have another question, but I also have another quote. So I'm going to say the quote first.
Make the quote.
Yeah, it's my identity.
Yeah, so then your action.
Then my
so
action
you
is-
got to follow up
And
now.
I'm gonna feel good
And we're
after
all going to
that.
feel good. Yeah.
So this is from a professor of philosophy at Hillsdale College. I don't know why I didn't have his name down, but I'll say the quote. It is by human nature to live by ideas rather than instincts and inclinations. And I say that just to tie it in, kind of wrap up what we were saying. Not necessarily wrap it up, but just support it. Is that there are things that we will take away from those before us, our parents and those of the like, and that will, consolidate that wisdom or that learning, that information, that knowledge within our minds, and will help propel us and to go forward. But there are those lessons and aspects of life that we have to experience ourselves in order to create new synaptic connections, and that I think is probably what's going on, with experience versus just verbiage that you hear. There's a stronger synaptic connection. That's medicine, though. We'll talk. That's it. Yeah. Anyways, but I think that's really important to understand our nature, to be aware of it. Right? We live by ideas. We, as a species, we want to know. We want to be in the know. It's especially people like we want to know. We want to get things right. We don't always have the luxury of not knowing. So knowing our nature, acknowledging it, and being resilient. I think all those things is what helps us to become just greater people, greater versions of ourselves. Don't fall for all of our emotions or instincts or inclinations. Form your own ideas, your own values. That will help drive you, propel you towards different horizons, different heights. And it's a positive perpetuation, right? It's a positive cycle. So keep going.
Okay, I finally have a quote now.
Oh
boy.
Got it. Something. That is not the one.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't have the sounds down completely.
Hey, man.
Yeah, you really got to
Practice
get on
makes
those sound buttons.
I gotta identify the sounds. I gotta take the action. I gotta let the feeling
That's
come
right,
out.
right.
Oh yeah, take an hour of personal development.
I do.
So
I
kind
really
of
do.
just based on everything that we've been talking about, it reminded me of this quote that often we need to be reminded rather than informed. And what that means is that we have all this knowledge. History repeats itself. You hear these things from your parents. You have all the information. And a lot of times I think when we get into conversations like this, I feel like, yeah, I knew that. Or yeah, that's really obvious. Like, yeah, I've definitely heard that before. But then we don't apply it, right? Or we move on and we forget about it. And so you just need to be reminded about these things and practice. And that will help you get to where you want to be.
Agreed. And I think, I'm the type of person that always likes to understand why things are the way they are. And I think it's because inspiration is fleeting. And that's why we need to be reminded of these things, because they can very much impact us in that fleeting moment.
Yeah.
But to have it come up again, to have that inspiration drive us again is the difficult task.
Here's my own quote. I'm tired of saying quotes from.
Yeah, we want Nate.
You want my own.
Yeah, Nate.
Lovely what you just said. I love that. That was a beautiful quote as well. What we often do. And it makes me think about this. And I quote from myself: reiteration creates resolve. Like you said, I'm not sure, did you say what was fleeting?
Inspiration.
Yeah. When we have these talks with whomever you have it with, friend group, strangers, family, it makes you feel good. Like, oh yeah, I should start applying that, or I should do this. And then that inspiration is often fleeting. We go about our life, stress, stuff to do, fun to have, and we forget about it. But that being reiterated, right? Hearing it again, talking about it again, listening to it again, I think creates more activation energy to get over that hump, reach that threshold to perform. So yeah, once again, my quote: reiteration creates resolve. Continuing, and sometimes I think I like that quote because sometimes I find myself as a human being, as a normal individual, when I think about, oh, I've already heard this before. Sometimes I'm like, I don't want to hear it again. I know this, like you said. I already know this, yeah. Sometimes, most of the time, I'm like, wait, I already know this. Walk away from the conversation or something like that. And then sometimes it hits me like, wait, I already know this, but when was the last time I heard this and why haven't I done it? Why is it making me feel this way? Reiteration creates resolve. That is very important.
That drives me to two things, because what you just said in your response to I already know this, I have done that as well. And, looking into the tenets of Stoicism and kind of like allowing that to kind of guide my ideology in certain aspects, I've realized that a lot of that comes down to ego. And, self-deception is the biggest contributor to our failures, I think. And by self-deception, I'm relating that to ego, because that is essentially what ego does. It deceives you as a person because it makes you think that you already know, like what you said, oh, I already know this. I don't need to hear it again. And, I'm always the type of person that I'm like, things are coming to me, these messages that I'm feeling, the people that come into my life, it's all happening for a reason. And that permeates nature, right? So, yeah, that's basically what you said, that's what it led me to, just the idea of ego. And then, yeah, what you said, reiteration leads to resolve. Absolutely. Because the more times you hear something, the more it's going to get reinforced, right? Some alliteration there, but yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. I got to talk about your failures as much as your successes. I was looking for another R word in between reiteration and resolve, and I couldn't think of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alliteration. That bad boy.
There you go. So, okay, so we've talked about a number of tenets that that we've already touched on. The conversation has flowed, I think, beautifully. I want to talk a little bit about just the idea that Stoics, or I guess I'll speak about it in how I viewed it before, and let's break that down.
Let's do it.
So before I even learned about Stoics and what that entails, I had this ideology or this notion that Stoics only attributed their philosophy to things that they could control, right? And I think in my head, I was like, Stoics would normally denounce the responsibilities of life to only focus on what they can control, right? But is that true or is that false? Or do you want me to explain further what I mean?
No, I think that makes sense, that you can interpret it that way if you think about it. It kind of sounds like maybe they're saying, well, don't worry about things you can't control. But really what I think they mean by it. So there's another practice, kind of like negative visualization. It's called the dichotomy of control.
Mm-hmm.
And it's thinking about things that you can control versus things you can't control.
Mm-hmm.
And namely, what you can control based on what the Stoic philosophy says, is that what you have control over is the internal world. And the external world is what you don't have control over. And so, namely, internal things are like your judgment, your emotions, your reaction. And so you can apply that to lots of different examples. So a kind of a classic example people use are working really hard towards a promotion. So let's say you're trying to get promoted and you do everything in your power to be promoted. You always get your work in on time. You're a great employee. Everybody likes you and you're ready and they're going to promote you. And then you don't get that promotion. You don't have control over that, right? You only have control over what you can do. So being the best employee, working really hard, those are things you have control over. You can't control if you get promoted or not. And so then at that point, what do? And so the Stoic philosophy would say, you don't worry about the fact that you didn't get promoted because you didn't have control over that. So you just focus on the things that you do have control over at that point. And so you, as a person, could have multiple options. You could mope around and become a bad employee again and decide that, well, you didn't get that promotion, so you're just going to give up. And that's not going to get you anywhere. It's not going to help you in your life. And so by focusing on those things that you do have control over, you're going to further yourself and do better. And maybe next time you'll get the promotion, but you can't base your happiness on whether you get that promotion or not.
Mm.
And so that's more, I think, what they meant about control.
Yeah, that's lovely that you bring that point. And I'll add to what you were saying, SJ, as well. This is also a quote from Eiselganger. Not sure if I'm saying the name right. Apologize if I am. But the quote goes like this. Ancient Stoics aim to be resilient towards things beyond their control and were determined on their path of virtue. Mental toughness is necessary to be truly good in the Stoic sense. We need to be strong enough to control destructive desires, to choose virtuous activities over vulgarity, and to anchor ourselves in the present moment. So my thought with this is it's very important to realize, one, the roots of what the Stoicism school of thought is. Like I said, the world works around telephone, that game. So you know the roots, and then you know how is it interpreted as, today. And I think with this quote right here, it makes you realize that we as a species can really utilize not only its roots and how it was founded initially, but also how it's been interpreted to make ourselves like a better life. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think it's really cool that you brought that up.
Yeah, and actually, when you were speaking, it made me think about because you talked about how that dichotomy of control in the internal versus external world, and how like you're working towards this job promotion, and you don't get it, so it makes you feel a certain type of way. And I like it made me think about the concept of value, right? Because whenever like the person who wants that promotion is placing a lot of value on this idea of getting this promotion, right? Rather than valuing things that actually matter, is being better at your job, the things that you can control, the internal aspect of yourself, because those are concrete. Those are things that will manifest even beyond just a temporary moment of dissatisfaction, that relief that you gain from getting that promotion, rather than like that restorative feeling of being like, okay, I did all this to work on myself, to improve myself. I still have gained a lot from this. And it just makes me kind of think more about other aspects of life as well, because just looking into this whole concept and me thinking about the things, like the material items that I value. And I'm thinking like, okay, what if I lost some of the things that I value most, right? Like I have this gold chain that I really like, and it's something that I love and I think it looks really good. And I was thinking to myself when I was learning about this, I was like, I value that so much that if I lost that, it would really actually impact me negatively. But really, it doesn't do much for me internally having it, right? It only does something for my external feelings of like, oh, this makes me feel good. I am attributing that value to an external object that makes me feel good. But really, it should be an internal thing that no matter what I have on, I should be feeling good because of the stuff that I do for myself.
Yeah, and actually there's a lot of examples of the ancient Stoics doing that, where they're practicing having a lack of things in order to, again, remind themselves of what they do have. And the other interesting thing that makes me think of is, I think sometimes people think that the Stoics are trying to say you shouldn't strive for, you shouldn't be rich, or you shouldn't be famous, or you shouldn't have all these things. And they never said you can't be rich and famous and do all these things. They just said that shouldn't be the focus of your life. That shouldn't be the goal outcome that you're striving for. Because like you said, if you are striving to have that gold chain to show everyone how cool you are, and then you lose it, or nobody thinks you're cool because of the gold chain, then you're going to be really disappointed. And that's not going to help you have a better life and live a happy life. And so when you focus on the things that are more internal and important for you, you're going to be a better person. You're going to get wherever you get. And if you turn out to be rich and famous and have a gold chain, that's cool. But that shouldn't be your goal, right?
Yes. Yes. I think that's perfect. Recognize that material wealth is neither evil or good, but just how you utilize that wealth matters in terms of like how it's going to play out in your life.
You're talking about the definition and how it can be perceived in different ways to everyone. Everyone has their own unique connotation of something. So I think it's interesting that how we perceive, so like say the definition of Stoicism, how we perceive that school of thought can help derive our actions from it, right? How we apply it. So once again, I think it's important to reiterate, just to create a little resolve for you guys, that Stoicism does not denounce emotion, right? We utilize emotion. If you are a human being and you denounce your emotion, you might as well jump in a robot if it's space, and just live life as a robot. You know what I mean? So do not denounce your emotions, because that you're denouncing your nature. Yeah, that's destructive. So utilize that. Utilize your emotions, but do not react negatively to your emotions. Don't let your emotions control what you do. You're supposed to control your emotions. Your emotions are a facilitator, right? As to what to do next. They should help guide you as to what to do next. They shouldn't command you to do what you should do next because you're angry. They're going to command you to do something that's of the angry nature. Like, no, that's not how it is. So, yeah.
Yeah. And okay. So in this conversation, we talked about this thing, and I want to go back to it just because I thought it was pretty powerful. We talked about the idea of enjoying things, and like I had this idea about Stoics of like they're boring people because they don't like to enjoy life, or they don't like to indulge in things. And yeah, I want to talk about that. Do you guys feel like you can be a Stoic and still enjoy life? Or do you have to look at it so logically and reasonably at all times where you're not able to enjoy the aspects of life?
I think they would say that it's more about having moderation and kind of finding a balance between extremes. So there's actually lots of different philosophies, right, that you can choose from. And one of them is all about indulgence. The hedonistic philosophies say that you should focus solely on the things that bring you pleasure. And so the Stoic philosophy, to contrast that, says that, hey, you can enjoy things and you should take pleasure in things. But if you're doing that all the time, if you're on the extreme of all you ever do are the pleasurable things, then you're setting yourself up for a lot of disappointment. And so, especially if those things get taken away from you. And so that you should find a way to balance. So sometimes you can enjoy pleasurable things. Absolutely. They're not saying don't enjoy your life. But on the other hand, you should also sometimes think about what would it be like if I didn't have these things, and use that to remind yourself of the things that you do have so that you're happy with what you have, if that makes sense.
I love that you brought up moderation, because I mean, this goes back even to like we've been reiterating this whole time. This philosophy, it's very applicable to this day. And even though it's such an ancient thing, even back in Seneca's time, and this is like one of the most ancient philosophers that exist. He said, we must be indulgent to the mind and regularly grant it the leisure that serves it as food and strength. And I think that's amazing, because you would definitely have to have some form of indulgence and enjoyment in your life, or else, you're just going to live a boring life. But I love that you brought up moderation, because if you have too much of what you're indulging in, is it really enjoyable at that point? Like I can relate this to myself. Back when I had so much time and I would play video games 3 hours at a time, after the third hour, I was like, I actually would not be having fun anymore. I would just be playing because I kept wanting to get better at the video game, which really doesn't have any, investment of return. But nowadays, even if I get to play for 20 minutes, I'm like, oh, that was really enjoyable, right? Versus like 3 hours at some point, it's like, okay, now I just feel bad for playing this long.
Yeah, too much of anything is not good. Whether that thing is a good thing or a bad thing. Too much of it, is not good. I love the concept of balance. It's very important. It's not easy. And, I can relate. It's not easy. Some people somehow are just able to, not everyone's wired the same. So it's not easy to achieve that balance in whatever you're trying to do. But it is very important to achieve that balance, or just to work at it. You spoke about hedonism and pleasures and whatnot. And I was looking into I wonder what the opposite of Stoicism is. And I came along this man named Epicurean. My apologies, Epicurus. And the school of thought revolving around Epicureanism. Did you look into anything like that?
Yeah, I've definitely read a little bit about them. They're not that different from Stoicism, I think. But
no, they're not that different. So what I read was it had to do with them avoiding pain, seeking natural and necessary pleasure. And on contrary to the Stoics, the Epicureans would actually not worry about controlling anything, if that makes sense. So they would say there is no control. Like you don't control, you have no control over anything, if that makes sense. And they just seek pleasure. But I didn't go into depth with that. But it was interesting when you brought up that hedonism and then seeking the pleasure, and knowing that moderation will actually bring, I think, the optimal nurturing from whatever endeavor it is, whether it's pleasure, whether it's pain from working out and exercise or struggling and stuff like that. So yeah, balance is very important.
Yeah. And nobody pretends like this is easy. It's always easier in the short term to do the most pleasurable thing. Mm-hmm. But ultimately in the long term, when you're thinking about your identity, what are the things that are going to make you happier and help you live a better life and be more tranquil and at ease. And so if you're always indulging in rich, delicious foods that aren't good for you, what's going to happen ultimately? In that moment, you'll be fine. But over the years, we have obesity and all these problems that come up, and now your joint hurts and you're wishing you had more moderation in your life.
That hits home. My joints be hurting a lot. Yeah.
You're only 25.
Yeah, you've got a ways to go.
Yeah, man. Just exposing me, age, diet. Speaking of diet, nutrition, and whatnot in the human body, I'm curious. I'm just curious. Stoicism in medicine. Do you feel as though Stoicism relates to medicine? And then if so, in what ways would you say Stoicism can be utilized in medicine? And medicine's a broad topic, I know that, but
right.
Yeah.
Well, Stoicism is really a philosophy of life. So it applies to everyone and to every facet of anything that you do. So, if you can coach your patients to think about some of these things that help them understand why they might be motivated to make some better decisions in terms of their own health, then that will ultimately benefit them from a medicine perspective.
I like that.
Agreed. I actually looked into, not really looked into, but I realized that a lot of the tenets of Stoicism and just like the framework for it is actually the basis for CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, right? And I'm sure that actually is something that we have all noticed the similarities in. Like you said, it's a way of life. So essentially, it's kind of rewiring how you think about things. And that's essentially what CBT does, right? And CBT is based on like the notion of logic, acceptance, and control, right? So by logic, I mean like you understand logically what it is that's going on with you, your perception of the world, or what I guess these external things that are coming at you and how you're perceiving those to be. Logically reasoning through that, being like, okay, this is what's happening, this is what's causing this, and this is the outcome, right? And then the next step is accepting it, right? It's like, okay, that's what's happening, that's what it's doing to me, and accepting like, okay, yeah, that's what's going on. And at that point, you can have a sense of control, because when we understand how something works, when we accept that same thing, we can have some level of control over it.
Yeah. No, I like that. It seems like I didn't write down that quote. There was a quote that I had that ties exactly into what you were saying verbatim, and I thought it would have been lovely to point out, but here I am just not having it. But you know what? CBT, MORE, that's also an acronym. That stands for mindfulness-oriented mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement. So those two kind of tie into the same thing, working with your mind, your brain, and restructuring how we think about things, how we reason through things, are the logos, right, of life. And I think that's very important. Another thing I wanted to touch on was us as a species again, right? Human beings, humanity, who we are, and how to help us progress as individuals, because it's tough. Life is tough. One thing I want all of us to understand is that, I think we already know that, but one thing I want to reiterate is that the natural course of things is disorder, right? And this is my opinion, so I might be wrong. Go ahead. But is disorder, right? Essentially entropy. Whether it's inside our bodies, whether it's outside, it's disorder. So it actually takes more effort to create order, right? Structure, organization, for our own success. It takes effort to wake up early in the morning for your own personal development. It takes effort. It's easier to stay in bed, get your sleep in, and then go about your day. 3 hours of video games. I'm lazy. I'm going to chill, eat some ice cream, watch Netflix. It's easier to relax and not do certain things, which will then down the line create disorder upon your life. It's harder and takes more effort and energy to create order, right? So the natural course of life, in my opinion, is entropy, right? And here's a quote from Marcus Aurelius himself. This is from Meditations in his 5:1. So you were born to feel nice. Instead of doing things and experiencing them, Don't you see the plants, the birds, the ants and spiders and bees going about their individual tasks, putting the world in order as best they can? And you're not willing to do the job or your job as a human being? Why aren't you running to do what your nature demands? So that's just, I think, a motivational reminder that we as human beings, for myself as well, we as human beings, we have work to do, not just for our community, but for ourselves and for ourselves first. So let's take care of ourselves, guys. Let's take care of ourselves. Let's try to be stoic, resilient. Let's try to be positive. Let's create a positive identity and positively perpetuate things in our life. And that's going to positively impact other people. You know what I mean? Just like this podcast is going to do for y'all.
Yeah, I really love that quote that you just said, especially thinking about Marcus Aurelius, because he was an emperor and, you know, he had a lot of responsibility and duties. And so having Stoicism as a philosophy of life for him, as a guide for what are the things that are important and what should I work towards and how can I contribute as a human, not only to myself, but to those around me, really positively impacted his, you know, rule as an emperor and his role in this world.
Yeah, he was actually, I love that you brought that he was an emperor, because he was known as one of the 5 good emperors is what I read. And basically what that means is there was a author that came about, I think back in the 1970s, and he did research on all this ancient, Roman emperors and all the different, I guess, ways that they ruled. And, you know, he said that he was one of the last emperors that ruled with good governing, which means that he gained the respect of the people and he did it for the people. And there's this thing that I came across, or not a thing, but it's a quote. I don't know if it counts as a quote, but it's more of like a saying. A good king guides the people with respect, but is also reviled. And by reviled, I mean he's kind of hated upon, right? But that happens because you're doing it for the betterment of the people as a whole, rather than being individualistic in your approach. So, like, let's say if you just focus on the nobles, you're gonna denounce the other people that are part of the kingdom, right? Basically, saying all that to just say that I agree. He was one of the better emperors that existed, and the fact that he utilized this philosophy, even in that time, like I keep saying, that's still applicable to this day, is just amazing. Because in Meditations, which it's pretty long, I was looking into it and I read like the whole first chapter. He spends a great deal amount of time talking about how grateful he is for all the things he has learned, and I thought that was amazing to start out this whole thing about, like, I guess, a journal of his life. He starts it off with gratefulness. And it's like, that is a huge, huge proponent as to why he was the kind of man that he was. Because to be that grateful, to have that lens on the world of being like, okay, the world has a lot to give me, has a lot to provide for me. How can I give back and how can I be grateful for it, right? Like internalizing that.
Well, and taking that and thinking about even the title of the book, Meditations, right, is demonstrating that it's about how he meditated upon these things. And so he was grateful, a lot of reflection. And so that's also a big part of Stoic philosophy, is reflecting on how things are going, how you are doing as a human, how you're contributing, and just working with that to improve every day as best you can.
It reminds me of what you guys are speaking about. Reminds me of us as future leaders, SJ, and then you as a current leader, in our communities, and as physicians / aspiring physicians. As a leader, like Marcus Aurelius was, it is easy to kind of just lavish in, I said lavish, that's the wrong word, but like kind of just chill in what you have and what you've accomplished. And that can actually be converted into you taking away from society, if you get what I'm saying. I think I'm missing a point. But essentially what I'm pointing at is, as an individual and even more so as a leader in the society, it's easy to take away or consume from society, from the community. And it's harder, but more important and better if we give back.
And more rewarding.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I just want to give a shout out to my big bro, Easy Steezen, Emmanuel. He spoke on that during the first episode. He spoke about how, he has his paintbrush, his canvas and everything now that he finished pharmacy school. Congratulations, bro. And, he's ready to paint how he wants his life to be. He has everything. He has all his tools, the information, the knowledge, his license and whatnot. And he's ready to give back. He's taken enough from society, the knowledge and everything that he's learned at his age. And he's now ready to give back, as a registered as a licensed pharmacist, and as knowledgeable as we know he is and whatnot. He's ready to give back. And I think that's just important as an individual, and especially as leaders, as who we're trying to become and as who you are, Dr. Boucher. So
that's super exciting.
Yeah,
I think that is. And, I think it's amazing to realize that at some point you do have to give back to your community. But I do think that sometimes people along the way, they come across certain roadblocks in life that make them, I guess, turned off to the idea to give back, whether that's an experience that they had with another individual, a corporation, an association, or whatever. And that kind of, I guess it's their perception of how they interpret that negative reaction, and that they allow that to kind of take them over, and they won't give back to something that actually would benefit them, right, in the long run, that rewarding feeling that you can gain. And I think in this day and age that we live, it's very easy to feel that negativity kind of just perpetuate throughout.
Yeah.
Because there's been many times, even me personally, when I have experienced something and I'm like, oh, there's no way I would give back to that. Like, I went to undergrad at Boise State University. I didn't think that it was the best experience in terms of education for me. Mm-hmm. But in hindsight, now that I look at it, it still got me to where I'm at today. Mm. So in the past, I would have been like, no, I would denounce that school, but that would not be I don't think that's a way to approach it, because there are still people that are going to be going to that school. Mm-hmm. And if I do that, that takes away from their experience, right? And this goes into the idea of, being compassionate and being able to turn the other cheek whenever you experience something that's negative in your life, right? And that's going to happen no matter who you are. You might have a negative encounter with a friend, but you're not defined by how that friend treats you, right? You're defined by how you treat that friend, even in those times. And this goes back to, we keep talking about Marcus Aurelius. There was a time when he had a very close ally to him. I forgot his name. You guys probably remember. I don't know his name. I forgot it. But basically what happened was he wanted to basically do a coup and take over the kingdom. Mm. And Marcus Aurelius ends up finding out about this. But instead of taking the approach that most kings would take, and to, emperor, and basically having this man killed, he says, no, I don't want him killed. I want to talk to him. I want to understand why he feels this way. And just reading that, I was like, this man really had this compassion thing down, because that's such a hard thing to do. Even in time of peril like that, when your life even is on the line, you're still deciding to make that difficult decision of being like, okay, take a step back. Why is this happening?
Wow, that's powerful. Oh man, SJ, do you have any other points that you want us to hit on?
Honestly, I think this has been a great conversation.
I agree.
Obviously, we're all busy people, so I think we can go towards the direction of wrapping this up. I know that you're very well knowledged on this topic. Are there any last concepts or any highlighting concepts you want to leave off with?
Yeah,
we've focused a lot on Stoicism and trying to expose people to different ways of thinking. And it just makes me realize that, you don't have to feel like Stoicism is the only thing you can do. And so kind of going back to your question about how I got to where I am, I think it's just one thing that is often missing from our lives these days is some kind of philosophy of life, anything that you can use to help guide you. And so if Stoicism resonates with you, then take it and learn from it. And if something else seems to resonate with you, then take it and learn from it. But find something that will help guide you. And ultimately, I think that is the most beneficial thing that we can do.
A tree with strong roots doesn't move.
A doctor who comes on this podcast for episode 4 of season Discourse is a great doctor.
I love it. And also, obviously, this is a topic that we talked about is Stoicism. I just want to leave off with a couple insights into if you want to look into Stoicism, if you want to become part of the community. There are 3 key podcasts that relate to Stoicism. Stoic Solutions podcast hosted by Justin Vakula, the Practical Stoic podcast hosted by Simon Drew, and Steve Karafitz, the Sunday Stoic. There's also a Facebook group called Stoicism Group. It has over 40,000 people in it. And then there's also a Reddit group that is actually analogous in its name. And it has over 430,000 people. So if that's something that resonates with you, go check those things out. And once again, this is Season Discourse. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you guys, man. You guys take care. Thank you, Dr. Boucher.
Yeah, thanks for having me.